right. Hello, everyone. Great to be here. It's amazing just seeing that an event like this can take place in Europe. I've been here about 10 years now, and it feels like probably up until 2 or 3, 4 years ago, we'd never be able to get this scale in Europe. So awesome to have you guys. We have an all-star panel here. Just really quickly, by way of introduction, Salesforce Ventures, the name gives us away. We're the strategic investment arm of Salesforce. I've been investing since about 2008, have over 180 companies in the portfolio all over the world, including the likes of MuleSoft, Twilio, Qubit, and Carto as examples as well. So today is really all about, we're going to dive into what happens to get to 10 million of ARR and beyond. I think the panelists can relate. One of the common things that founders seem to hit is after that 10 million mark, everything's going great. And it all starts to break down. And all of a sudden, you're wondering, wait a minute, I thought the 1 to 10 was hard. It's actually getting even harder going from 10 to 50. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But without further ado, let's have the panelists introduce themselves. Javier, maybe you can kick us off. Just quick introduction on Carto, size of the company, and where you guys are based.
Sure. So, well, my name is Javier. So we are a company based in New York and Madrid. We started in Madrid, but then moved to US. We are around 130 people, so they've been running since 2012. And yeah, we focus on helping organizations to do location intelligence, so figuring out how to use location data to do things like site selection or improving, network optimization, so delivery networks. So it's an analytics software company, so it's basically focused, on helping, analysts to work with that type of data. And mostly we commercialize in the United States, but we do most of the production in Spain. So offices in London and Washington, but yeah, mostly you can find me in New York.
Great. PJ?
Hey, so I'm PJ, co-founder, CEO of Showpad. We're a sales enablement platform, so basically focused on making sales teams more productive. So think inside sales, field sales, or companies with big channel organizations or big channel sales teams or as well. So we do that through making sure marketing can control the content, so easily manage it, push it to the reps. Reps can mix and match slides. You get a ton of analytics. You can improve the content and the messaging. So founded the company 2011. We're now at about $25 million ARR, about 250 people, about 170 people in Europe. So Ghent is our home, headquarters, Belgium. Engineering's there, product's there, and then we have quite a big team in the US as well, about 70 people. 50 of them are in San Francisco, 20 are in Portland.
Nice.
And going for the 100 million, right?
Very cool. Graham?
Hi, I'm Graham Cooke. I'm CEO of Qubit. We're personalization technology. We power the internet, about 40% of the internet retail 100 companies like Farfetch, Net-a-Porter, Ubisoft, all the way through to airlines like Emirates Airlines. And what we're doing is really essentially 800 million people a month are getting a personalized experience across our 300 customers. And it's a big data problem, and we're just figuring out how to ultimately change user behavior to increase the value of the shopping journey. Founded the company in 2010, headquartered in London. I was at Google, and one of the things I learned while I was at Google was that London was the e-commerce capital of the world, most spend per capita than anywhere else, so we thought it was a good place to start a business to help e-commerce businesses. And that's worked out pretty well, apart from Brexit, but it's worked out pretty well being based in London. But we have 7 offices now, 220 employees, 7 offices, and our second biggest location would be New York, followed by Paris. And we try and keep close to our customers in terms of all our offices.
Very cool. I told you, all started panel. What I love about the stories there is all 3 of you have had companies start in Europe and then expanding into all different locations. And obviously, as investors, one of the things we care most about is the team. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that kind of inflection point at the 100-person mark. Interestingly, you've all grown beyond that with sizable teams. And as a founder, that starts to change, right? The dynamic, all of a sudden, you don't know every single employee anymore. After 100 people, you probably aren't involved in every interview anymore. You certainly don't know what everyone has done over the weekend. And so just talk a little bit about that cultural change in the company as you kind of get to multiple locations, multiple cities, certainly above 100 people. What are some of the things that kind of are hard, and how did you deal with them? Graham, maybe you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I mean, I heard, there were two things I heard when I was early stage building the business. One of them was from a VC, way big in the beginning of the company. I was talking to this VC, and they told me about this mythical $10 million. And I'm like, shit, it's already really hard. What do you mean I've got this big risk to hit $10 million? And the other one was, about getting to your 100 people. And so I kind of like worried a little bit about these mythical numbers and sort of saw what happened to the business. But the biggest thing I noticed on the way to 100 people was getting to 30 people. 30 felt like we're a company, we're established, we're doing something, we're making a meaningful impact to our customers. But we were all one company, one team, easy to communicate, all on one floor, and ideas moved at the speed of light. And then as we kind of got, to 65, to 70, 80, started to move into multiple offices, communication just really hit the wall. Like, it really hard to communicate. And you'd just be like, what do you mean you're not up to speed on this? And so we had to devise ways to essentially keep the company as one. Global all hands are really important. Do it every week, weekly update emails. We had video hangouts, Google Hangouts, always on for different locations. So you could literally walk up to the screen and talk to somebody in New York. And so we had to try and just keep the communication flow as natural as possible. But it was really hard.
So you go from no process at all, where you can just turn around and talk to the person behind you, to actually having to think about some of those processes. Is that consistent with you guys?
Yeah. Totally relate to the story there. And I think additionally, what I found really difficult is, in the early days, 30, 40 people, super close, but also nobody actually cares for his or her career, right? Because there's no career yet, there's no revenue, there's no company, you're still kind of building. And then as you get like to 10 million or beyond, people start to think, well, hey, there's all these new people coming in, there's maybe managers, or maybe you hire a VP, and then if you maybe do some wrong hires, you get people who are too obsessed with careers and titles, and that also I felt like that's when you had at that 10 million mark, that's when some of that dynamic starts to come into the company, and it's a hard one because you're not used to dealing with it. You're used to just having people working, a lot, super hard, going for the that big, 10 million big dream, and again, there's no revenue, there's no career, and suddenly, hey, I want this title, or there's a VP sales. Hey, I want to be a VP sales. And you need to start to manage all of these expectations, and I felt that is like one of the hardest things that happens.
That's interesting. The first time someone said, what does my career progression at Showpad look like?
You're like,
what?
And I was like, what?
So we did actually have a similar, like career paths. Like, oh, wow, do we need to set up now all that across the entire company? I think it's at the same time also, like, when you start adding some of those VPs, and that suddenly you start having conversations in the company like, hey, but what about the culture of the company? And it's like, well, culture is, like everybody talks about, like, yeah, you have to protect the culture. But you're small, you don't really talk about it. It just really happens. And then suddenly someone's, oh, no, this is really changing the culture of the company. And then you get all these things, especially if you're doing multi-locations. Like, yeah, the spirit over there is different than in this office. And you try to first to replicate the same on one, and it doesn't really work. So you cannot be exactly the same in all the places. So you have to, and those are some of the challenges that I found. Like it comes with this new VPs. It's not only like, hey, you're taking my position, but oh, you're changing the company, and I don't like it anymore. Or like you have to redefine much more what it means.
You're trying to have one Carto culture, but there's different offices, and there's that balance. And
right, and you have to be all the time. And I think this is particularly important on this path. Is you really have to adapt new. You have to take new DNA. You have to start thinking in a different way.
Yeah.
But, the way that you thought, when you were like 30 and you were like very innovating very fast. So it doesn't, like work anymore. And that is clear. You see that well and say like, wow. If we don't start listening more to the customers, if we don't, like align our roadmap more towards what we hear, like you will not make it. It's not the same audience, and that is the type of change of like people to convince them that they have to kind of like do things in a different way, and that probably they have to learn from people who are coming from outside. That it's one of the hardest. They're saying like, what are you talking about? I mean, I was here from day one, and now you're telling me that we should do it this other way. That takes a lot of, our past was one of the hardest ones.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I hear a lot, founders also struggle with, those first maybe 5 employees that joined when you guys had nothing. And kind of if that person doesn't necessarily scale over time, how do you kind of think about that? I'm curious, at the kind of VP level or maybe even C level that you brought in, as you cross that 10 million, feedback we hear a lot from founders is, actually, we didn't have our management team in place, and I wish I had a lot more support. Is that something you face? And had you kind of already hired that next layer of management?
Yeah, it's absolutely one of the hardest things to do because you need to bring in experience. Like your initial team is building the product with the customer, you're passionate about what you're building, you're figuring things out, you're communicating rapidly, but then you get to a point where it's like we're missing experience, we're missing DNA to scale, to get to the next stage. And there's this incredible phrase, I don't know if anybody, you need to hire the black sheep from the blue chip. Has anybody heard this phrase? Yeah. So this is from a guy.
They have now.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy. If I could go back to my pre-100 employee company, if I could read this book called The Founder's Mentality by James Allen. He's actually a guy at Bain. He's come in and spoken to us a couple times at Qubit. And it's all about how do you maintain the founder way of thinking as you scale to a larger org. Because typically what happens when you start to bring in executives and start to scale, you start to bring in a lot of processes, a lot of metrics, and you start to get away from the customer and away from the founder in the trench warfare mentality. And you start to look at metrics about metrics about metrics. And we found that we got into that. And so this framework is phenomenal. And it's a 15-minute YouTube video, if you don't want to read the book, that explains how to think. And you got to hire the black sheep from the blue chip. Because if you bring in a corporate executive who's really corporate into your company, you're screwed. They will corporate your business day to day, and you won't know what your company is anymore. And you really need to get that right.
There's actually a corollary to that, which is like that is one of the challenges. But you have another challenge is that you bring all this new experience to your organization, and then suddenly you create two levels: the old execs or the founders, and then the executive team, right? And suddenly like that VP with a lot of experience does not feel so like responsible. It's not like, well, it's my company, but it's really, there's always someone that will have the last call, right? So if you create this arbitrary or, like this artificial new level that doesn't empower them, and that's very, very challenging. So that was, for example, for us, how we could break, like how we could have not like Slack channels that will not go through the executive, channel. Type of things like that was like, and you have to do really hard to break them.
And I feel one of the biggest pitfalls there is as you hire those first executives is also making sure that you hire people who can not only then do the 10 million to 20 million, but preferably, at least people who can stick around for another 2, 3, preferably like, a couple of years. And I felt if you make too much compromise, because usually the moment that you start looking for that VP or more, senior management experience, you're already under usually a lot of pressure, like, okay, things are breaking, and we need to bring somebody in fast, because like somebody needs to fix it. And then you meet this person, and you're like, hey, maybe that person has been at Google or has, some, super relevant experience already, and for sure is more experienced than your team, and kind of like, matches a lot of the criteria, but then I would challenge everybody to push higher, and like on that, we've made those mistakes of bring in people who were super good then for like the next stint, but like then again we had to top them with, and then that becomes very hard. If you then have to suddenly top those people, or maybe fire them or what.
You had the 6 months to hire and all that, and I see that the most in the VP of sales position, where folks will kind of hire someone that's great today, can kind of execute deals, and then all of a sudden they're not a people manager, and as you get to the next level, it starts to break.
I don't know about you guys, but for me, and Louis, my co-founder, it's the first time also we're hiring those roles and type of people. So you don't have the experience to kind of,
what are we looking for?
What are we looking for? And that's where I feel if you have good VCs and a good network of entrepreneurs, leverage them, let them do some interviewing.
That's great advice. We're going to switch gears a little bit. I feel like we could spend the whole afternoon talking about team, but I'd love to pick your brains a little bit on kind of go-to-market and customer segmentation. One of the things that I think most founders in the 0 to 10, they're just grabbing revenue anywhere they can, right? You want to scale. You're trying to figure out exactly who the right customer segment is. And as you kind of get to the 10 million, it feels like there's a shift that happens internally. So maybe just allude a little bit to kind of how you guys think about your ideal customer base. Graham, I know you've spent a lot of time thinking about this recently.
Yeah, a lot of time. I mean, the 0 to 10 million phase was like, if you got a heartbeat and you got dollars, you're a client. And we took on some ugly customers. And I think it was, Ryan Smith was saying this yesterday. you know, you're in this sort of semi-controlled chaos, which is just sort of learning, rapidly learning. And if you can create the right disciplines and metrics, you can run that very successfully. And I think we did okay. We grew to 10 million really quickly. It took us just a couple of years from when we hit 1 million. And then we really kind of like, we continued to scale to the next 20, 30 in that form. And we had to really sort of start to evaluate why some things weren't working, why some clients would expand 8x in 2 years, and why other clients were just a nightmare, churning, all this other pain. And so customer segmentation, which was actually some advice I got from the guys at Salesforce, from you and the team at Salesforce, you know, customer segmentation is such a core part of Salesforce's strategy. So we started to implement this, this program called Odyssey, and it was all about categorizing our customers into different segments and 2 axes of maturity, and we really were able to see the entire pattern. Here were the valuable customers, here were the bad customers, and we were able to run a strategy around that. And that transformed our business, and there's no way we could get on the path to 100 million now without having solved that. And it's been a fundamental change for our business.
And it's probably something you keep solving, right? Like you keep fine-tuning it. I mean, that's what I found.
Rinse, repeat.
Keep repeating that exercise, because at every stage, like, you know, things change and you discover either inefficiencies or things that you can do better with you know, extract more revenue from those, you know, ideal customers.
And how do you get the team to line on that? I mean, I imagine it's got to be hard. You know, you're there trying to meet your quota for the month, the quarter, and you've got this kind of bad, ugly customer that's not the right fit. You know, will probably churn, isn't kind of where your company adds the most value, but you have to kind of incentivize and encourage people to say no to that, because you know that, you know, the real opportunity is focusing on that customer base or that segment. Is that a comp plan issue? Is that a cultural issue?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know in your experience, but I mean, like, for us, I mean, one of the things is like, probably you don't want to get to the point where you say like, hey, stop selling that because it's bad for us. And the guy saying like, well, but I'm selling so much. And you know, like, how can you take this out from me? I'm not going to make my quota. Normally it's not like that. Normally they also notice the pain of those type of sales.
Right.
So normally by the time you know already, so like every year, for example, you don't realize, but you start selling many more things that you were thinking at the beginning. So, and every year says like, oh, we thought we were going to sell these 3 things, and now we're selling 6 things. So you have to be always, you know, like try to reduce it. And somehow, you know, like that has to be part also of the discussion that you have with your team. So your sales teams are not just, you know, like this function that you put on the side and tell them what to sell exactly. They know it too. You gather information from them. So normally by the time you have to talk to them and say like, this type of deals is bad for the organization, or these ones have more opportunity, they already kind of like know it. And if they trust and they buy your vision and you kind of like make them part of this, normally it's more natural than that. I mean, I haven't come to the case of saying like, oh, we're going to be millionaires this way, and no, sorry, you're not going to do that.
Right.
That's not.
One of the things we've found is that depending on what you're building as a product, the maturity of your market determines the crappiness of your potential customers. Because if your market is relatively immature, you're going to bring on customers that aren't right. And so we actually evolved away from this 4-segment strategy into ideal customer. And so now we operate with just a single ideal customer focus. It's actually owned by my VP of product. And essentially that is the product focus, the roadmap, the marketing, everything is around the ideal customer. And then it's a strategy, how do we get everybody who isn't ideal to be ready to be an ideal customer? And so culturally, that's really gone down well. And then we, you know, ultimately a comp scheme really ensures good behavior, especially in offices, you know, all across the world. And you know, if you can create a comp scheme that rewards renewal, that rewards you know, multi-year deals, multi-year renewal, you know, you're going to be in a really good place because you're not going to bring on customers that you'll lose in a year.
And I think to add to that, what I would do as well is make sure we discussed this yesterday, where you also add on, you know, some process, not too much, but make sure that if they're working on opportunities in the CRM and in Salesforce, that you create discipline and certain, like, hey, okay, if you want to move this opportunity to a next stage, you know, this is the type of information we definitely need to be able to judge and get visibility on, like, does this match the ideal customer profile or the profile we want to sell to or not? Because then it makes it easier as well to filter out, you know, at the end of the day, most inefficiencies are because your sales team is talking to the wrong customer.
Yeah.
Right.
And they lose so much time. And
There's
it's
a lot
only
of standardization that you're saying, actually, here's what qualified
Yeah.
means for us, and here's how we know it's going to the next stage.
And then making sure that when you have those tough calls to make, when you have to say no, I believe then it's super important as founders or like, or product leaders to make sure that Louis or myself, we would jump on a call with a customer then, paint them the long-term vision, really explain them well, like, hey, sorry, we're not going to do this for you, but, this is the value of our product, buy into that, and here are the rewards in the long term. And
There's a great metric, it's called sales velocity. And so you measure the amount of days it takes to close a deal divided by the amount of revenue from the deal. And you essentially get a number which basically tells you the amount of revenue that salesperson makes per day. And you might find that you closed a really big deal, but it took 9 months, is much lower sales velocity, revenue per day for that sales rep, than a smaller deal that took less time. And so you can really start to qualify things objectively. And that's been critical, thinking like that. And then a good objective sales process, like there's a scheme called MEDIC, M-E-D-I-C, and it's about objective qualifiers in the sales process. And again, that's built into Salesforce, built into the sales process, and it's been a real game changer for sales discipline across the company. You can't move your opportunity to the next stage unless you've actually qualified that it is the right customer to sell to.
One of the things we care about kind of almost maniacally at Salesforce is tracking every single metric and measuring the Salesforce in every way, slicing and dicing it in a million different ways. And I think if you don't do that, you're kind of driving blind a little bit.
Yeah.
And I love some of the kind of thought leadership that you guys are talking about, because it sounds like as you're looking to own that space, your respective categories, if we shift gears a little bit to talk about product, I feel like there's a sense from what I'm hearing of, you kind of have to be a trailblazer in terms of where you're taking your markets. Part of that is bringing customers with you based on different adoption curves in the market. Part of it is telling your teams what to focus on. Javi, maybe you can shed light a little bit on kind of the product and engineering challenges as you go from a smaller company to the scalable business.
Yeah, so I think the beginning, it's always, is this change on audience, right? So when you are like smaller, it's really about like the early innovators. So you're curious about like all the innovation, going very fast, testing many things. So you don't listen too much to the market. You just listen to a few kind of like key customers, and you go with that. So in our experience, like what we had a lot of that was like the beginning that the product will be very, just focus on the innovation and looking on inside. And then it was, like, how do you shift that towards, like, listen more to the market, right? And for us, it was like that. We put it, together with actually another challenge, which is like in our case, and I guess a lot of people here too, like we do product in Spain, but we commercialize in US. So 60% of our revenue is US, although we make product in Spain. So the kind of like the classical kind of like tension you have is, okay, your product is developed not where your customers are, and how do you solve that, right? And you can do a lot of trouble back and forth, but eventually you're going to have to decide, when you're doing product, that this scales like, I want my VP of product to be closer to my developers, or or I want them to be closer to my actual customers. And that is something that you have to choose as a company. I think that's one of the biggest, because you're gonna definitely need to have that connection with the customers and with the market, and you have to solve it. Like how will it work in the communication? So it goes back again to the challenges around the team. So, but that is one of the biggest transformations that we've seen, especially in a multi-country. So you guys are in similar situations.
Yeah, we've been back and forth on this a couple of times at Showpad, and Showpad, we originated in Belgium. That's where engineering was. From 0 to 10, I would say most of the product happens with the founders, and it's you're super close with that team. Louis, my co-founder, moved to the US. We started recruiting.
How many people were you when you moved?
We were about, let's say, 30, 35 people when Louis moved. So post Series A, we just raised $1.5 million back then. Louis moved there, and of course you find way better product managers or more experienced product managers in San Francisco. We started out building a product team there, but then suddenly the 9-hour time difference was a huge hurdle for us. It really catched us up in terms of we couldn't. Velocity of shipping went down, the quality of the product went down, and we said okay, we have to make a change. And then we decided to move product back to Ghent again, so closer with engineering. And it's been a huge move for us.
Difficult one. You've kept it now in Belgium?
And we kept it now in Belgium. And the good thing is once you're then bigger as a SaaS company and you have more means and more reputation, more name, we get to attract talent from outside of Belgium as well, and product roles now. So which is which is
Definitely
good.
pros and cons there of both. I
Yeah.
guess, Graham, you
Yeah,
guys in many ways are lucky that the market is largely in the UK in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, we try and keep our product development as close as possible to our customer. I mean, we're solving a fuzzy problem. We're creating a new category. Personalization is not something that exists today for businesses. And so as a category creator, you have to be close to your customer. You have to understand their problem. And I actually put our office, our headquarters in Covent Garden on a street with 5 of our customers. And when the product team start to get into a fuzz and don't know how to do something, I go downstairs and go into NARS and watch how people buy lipstick, and then build the product to solve for that problem. And so that we're actually very practical in the sense that we can actually do that. And I think it's in a fuzzy problem, if you're all located all over the world, it's quite hard to be successful. If you're building a very clearly defined, you're trying to reinvent something that already exists, then you can probably work better as a globally distributed team. So it's pros and cons.
Bill, from the talk before, mentioned the customer obsession at Salesforce. So I love hearing these real life customer stories of go out and meet your customers. We're short of time, so last question for me is really, as you kind of think about the next phase of growth, now you've reached this milestone, you started prep for 50 million of ARR and beyond. Maybe you can each share, one thing that you're kind of is on your mind and you're trying to look out for as you kind of get to that. Is it we spoke a lot about team, we spoke a lot about market, we spoke about kind of product. What is it that keeps you up at night as you look at the 50 million mark?
Yeah, I'd say it's definitely hiring. I mean, building, I think we were late to do this and still are in a many sense, but hiring and building, having a cultural values that you really believe in isn't some bullshit thing you sit in the room and come out with and think it's HR-led. Build values you really believe in and then make sure you hire to those values. As a global company, you'll hire the best people if you can hire to the values that make your company great. And that's my number one piece of thing I think about, my number one piece of advice.
Nice. PJ?
Yeah, very similar for me. It's hiring, it's attracting that talent, it's painting the vision and making sure that it's, aligning, what you're about as a company and what your vision for the product is, and then making sure that you keep, execution at the same, level and have that, make it happen. And it's a fun ride. And if you're at 10 or 25 and, the road to 100 is still, a couple of years out.
Right.
And so make sure that you have the right team to do that.
Cool.
Yeah. So I guess, teams is definitely, but now going a bit more practical into what keeps you awake at night. There's obviously much more competition when you go to certain levels, and how do you maintain that competitive edge? How do you read the market? Is it when you're very small, you think anybody can destroy you at any moment, that's for sure. But, when you're also am I missing it entirely wrong, the market, and these guys are going to come here and they're going to do that and so on. And do I have enough of talent to be able to read the market and, what is going to happen so that to be ready for that?
Nice. Well, we were talking about it yesterday. To start a company, you have to be a little bit crazy. And I think that the good and the bad is that it's always challenges, but amazing what you guys have done. So thank you for sharing that insight. I learned a lot, and I hope you did too. So please join me in saying thank you to the panelists.
Thank you.